I mean, after all, at some point, they're going to start looking at your brakes, not just your papers, please, but your brakes as well. Kevin Lindsey, of course, is the manager of technical service at Travel Centers of America. As he is wont to do on Tuesday, he joins us for Maintenance Matters. How are you, sir? Welcome back. How was your weekend?
My weekend was very short. Isn't that always the case, though? Aren't they always shorter than we would like for them
Oh
to
my
be?
God. I think I need to start them like on like middle of Thursday. I think if I start my weekends at the middle of Thursday, I might actually have
I'm,
a genuine weekend. You want to join me in that?
yeah. Let's maybe we can start a movement. Can we say we can?
That'd be kind of great,
We
wouldn't
can.
it? Kevin
Weekend
Lindsay and
starts at lunchtime on Thursday. There we go.
wouldn't that be awesome? Kevin Lindsay and Jimmy Mack start the weekend begins at lunchtime on Thursday. Oh my God, could you imagine? And I swear there are people who are like, well, you'd get used to it. I would never, I would celebrate it for the rest of my life. If I could look at Dre and be like, let's wrap it up, buddy. I mean, Dre, how would you feel if you got paid the salary you got paid and on Thursday you could just wrap it up?
Don't ask me that question.
You see, you want to contemplate the reality of that. So we are back at it. It's Tuesday, which of course is the day that we finally recovered from having to come back to work, and it's a good time to kind of talk maintenance matters. We've been kind of finishing up with our friends from Castrol Oil. We talked about oil for a little bit. We're going to pivot back to brakes here. Give me a pivot, guys, both of you. There you go. So we're going back. We're going back to brakes. So where would you like to kind of begin? And where should we kind of find an entrance point here?
Well, this week actually being Brake Safety Week, since we're kind of in the middle of it here, so I thought we could just kind of continue talking about some of the things to look for yourselves, as you're doing your walk arounds or daily inspections or just whatever, different things to look for.
When I used to work at the DA's office, we used to do custodial inspections. You check people out to make sure they can take custody of their sons and daughters. And there were some good guys and some good gals out there who really wanted to do right by their kid. And every once in a blue moon, when the process would start, we would meet a mom or a dad who was paying child support and didn't have full custody or didn't have a large amount of custody. We would tell them just in passing, hey, as you kind of get yourself back on your feet and get yourself set up, if you ever want to come by here and ask for tips, we can always help you. And one thing I want to remind people is that think about what you would inspect if you were an inspector and really kind of go about that. Now, I don't know if that applies with the brakes and all, but is there a series of things that you can absolutely check to make sure that they look so far and no further? Because there is a point, isn't there, where people kind of look and go, you're fine. You know what I'm saying? Where they don't dig any
Yeah.
deeper because certain things are already in order. Can you kind of talk about that with brakes?
Well, quite honestly, it's almost like anything else, and I think the drivers that have been around a while and been through a few inspections, been through a few weigh stations, different things like that, the less attention you can draw to your piece of equipment, the better off you're going to be. And typically, stop and think about this with cars and stuff like that. The shinier something is, man, hey, that draws people's attention to it, right? So don't think of it that way. That's the cleaner and the shinier it is. It looks. It gives the appearance that the upkeep on it is the same, right? Someone taking pride in their piece of equipment and things like that, and those things show. So just keeping wheels clean. That's a big thing, especially you pull trailers. Even pulling trailers that aren't yours, that belong to another company, well, they can still put you out of service for that trailer, even though it don't belong to you. But that's your load you're trying to haul, right? So you really want to, kind of look those things over, make sure things look pleasable to the eye, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, no, and by the way, that's what I call there's a thing that I've told Lindsay and I've told Dre, I tell my wife all the time, I call it the rule of two. When you hear something from somebody separately, either that you thought about or that you've heard from one person and then hear from another person who haven't really talked about it, you kind of know you're onto something. Dean Croak always told me that one of the first things that he does when kind of taking care of his truck is to always make sure those tires are clean, to really
Yeah.
make sure that's the situation. And if it's foundational. I mean, I know it sounds crazy to people, but it's like, look at tires, go, oh no, this person's is on top of it. This person knows what's what. This person's doing their thing. And it doesn't mean they're not going to look at some stuff, but it does mean that they begin with the assumption. I can tell you this, I can go back to my own experience. You walk into a clean home, you look a lot less. Very few people like go
Yeah.
over and inspect like the pipes on the sink. People don't start looking under the cabinets. When you see stuff all over the counter, when you see grease everywhere, you start looking. When you see a beautifully well set kitchen, you kind of go, "This is nice. This is kind of nice. Okay, what's going on here?" And then you move on to the next room. There's really that
Yeah.
sense of it as well too. Okay, so we talked about the tires real quick. What are like? Let's do a brake inspection for ourselves, Kevin. Take me through it. Like, take me through the truck and just say, before you get out there on the road, how are you inspecting your own brakes?
I would say the first thing is, as you're doing your walk around, you want to look at first of all, observe your wheel ends and everything. Make sure you don't have hubcaps leaking, different things like that. That's going to draw that scrutiny to look a little deeper, right? Little things like that. But when you look behind that wheel at where your S cams are and your slack adjusters and your brake chambers, make sure that stuff is visible. Make sure nothing appears loose or anything. There's so much can be done. Not just on the simple walk around, but as you're checking tires. If you can reach a brake chamber rod or something, just moving things, making sure there's no lines rubbing. And if you do see lines that appear to be close, air lines that appear to be close to something, take a quick look at them. Is there any way, you could take a zip tie or something and make sure they're not rubbing up against something. Little things like that, because I can tell you, as a fellow traveler down the highway, that's one thing I really pay attention to. As I go by trucks, I look for things moving that I know shouldn't be moving. So, and of course that's just driving down the road, but that's the same things I look for. When I'm doing an inspection myself, that's the first things I kind of look for. Is there things that look out of place? This is not located where it was, last week when I looked at this, or yesterday when I looked at this. What happened here? It's something come up off the road, hit it, now it's moved something. It could have done some other damage. So you want to make sure that stuff all looks good. I hope what I'm saying is making sense. I'm really trying to think of something very high level here.
No, actually,
I had overview.
I had a thought too to kind of start off with. And by the way, it's always assumed with you. I always tell people safety is boring, so be boring.
Yeah.
And that's one of the
right?
things people don't think about. That it's like, what you don't want to do is start your day with a cut hand. What you don't want to do is start your day getting something, having too much pressure on it and breaking bones in your hand, or, doing any sort of real damage to your elbow. And you know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, it's just take your time while you're doing this. I mean, people always forget to make a habit of setting up for safety. And that means, being Uncle Joe from Petticoat Junction, moving just a little bit slower, to make sure that you do your diligence, because there's nothing worse than doing everything right and you went too fast and clipped your finger.
Yeah. Honestly, you made me think of something here. I was actually in a hotel room last night watching American Ninja Warrior. And one part of the course is where they have I forget what they call them, pivotal monkey bars or something, but basically, to me, it looks like a jack handle, a little. I mean, I'm a mechanic. I see a hydraulic little bottle jack handle is what I see. But that's what they're using for the monkey bars, and there's these little slots, and they have to, they go to the next one, but that bar has to come off with them and go into these slots. Well, what I noticed watching that last night is the guys that, really made it through it, they're really particular about that. So they actually slow down a little bit, even though they're racing against the clock, against another person. They actually slow down a little bit and making sure they got that. The ones that went too quick, had issues and ended up falling in the water. So,
Well, I'll tell you, Kevin, I'll make you
be
laugh.
deliberate, right?
My partner used to say, "Brother, you need to slow down to hurry up." Was one of my
That's
favorite things
right.
he ever
That's
said to
right.
me, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And the first time I did it, it hit me. I'm like going, "Oh, I'm doing one damn thing after another, and because I'm doing that, I'm actually getting this done faster because I'm not tripping over my mistakes." That when we
Yeah.
race
Yeah.
and put one thing on top of each other, and I know, I look, guys, I know we sound so basic, but it's just amazing how many people don't do this and then don't see the thing that's like kind of, jiggling, don't notice the stuff that should have been taken care of. It really is
Yeah.
about safety is boring, so be boring. I mean, that's
Be
really what it kind
boring
of comes
because
comes down to. Go ahead.
it no, absolutely, because you know when you slow down like that and make things deliberate, so you know you've got it done right. It's when you feel like you've got to speed up and you speed that process up a little bit quicker than normal. That's usually when those issues happen, where it could be just a wrench slipping, maybe you're grabbing something or you're not using that 3-point stance in and out of the truck, different things like that because you're in a little bit too much of a hurry. Those are the times that that little safety bug jumps up and says, "Ha, got you."
By the way, Kevin, really quickly, I want to tell people anytime I hurry, here's what me hurrying in the morning sounds like. Oh my God, I forgot my glasses. Oh my God, where's my wallet? Oh my God, where's my pen? Oh my, literally. There was a couple of mornings ago. I wasn't even late. I was just rushing to go do something else, and I swear, Kevin, had to open the door to my home 3 times. I would get to the car, put my stuff in, and look at the bag and be like, "Oh, there are 2 things that are not in there." And then go in there rushing, grab one of the things, and forget that I'd left the other one there. I wanted to actually ask you a particular, since we're talking about safety. Safety is boring, so be boring. How do you check your slack adjusters? What is the best kind of approach to doing that?
Well, first of all, you're going to have the brakes released, so you got to have wheels chalked or anything like that. I mean, for a quick check with everything set as you're going around, really, you can just grab the slack adjusters and you want to, make sure there's no excessive movement because if the brakes are set, there should be pressure on all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the real way of checking that slack adjuster is with the brakes, the parking brakes released, of course. So if it's a steer axle or an axle that only has service brake side, meaning, when it only applies when you hit the brake pedal, it's not part of the parking system. So, and when I say brakes released, that's what I mean. The parking brakes have to be released and of course the service brake
Right.
so that there's movement there in that slack. But there's 2 different ways of checking that. And really what you're checking is the stroke is the main thing. And that's because there's one way of checking it. It's called free stroke, which if once the brakes are released, free stroke is just how far you can move it, by hand or with a wrench that you can put on it to pivot it some. Because, there's springs that are still, holding against these things, but they're a lot weaker than the parking spring and stuff like that in the chamber. So, but that free travel, there's a good idea of what that free travel should be. Typically you're looking, an inch or so. Usually you don't want to get more than an inch of just free travel because you don't have all that pressure being applied to it. You're just moving it. That's how much movement you have. Typically you're looking at a half to 3/4 of an inch of free travel on a parking brake chamber when the parking brakes are released. But not only that, because that lets you know that everything's moving and pivoting properly. But on slack adjusters themselves nowadays, you've got the part where your brake chamber rod connects to it, whether with a clevis pin, whether it's threaded on or whether it's welded on from a factory. It's made for that particular size. But there's other little ears and little dowel pins, pivot pins that go through that slack adjuster that'll have cotter pins on the ends. You want to make sure those can turn when they don't have pressure on them, because if they can't turn and rotate, that means that the self-adjuster portion of that slack adjuster is not going to be adjusting itself properly with every brake stroke. So that's another one of those little key indicators you can kind of look at with those brakes released as you touch a slack adjuster. Just grab those little clevis pins and make sure they can rotate a little bit.
So basically, what you're telling me, I want to just kind of sum this up, is you want things moving a little bit, but you don't want things moving a lot. You want to make sure there's a little bit of give, but you don't want to make sure it gives way to bad things. I mean, that's kind of the game we're playing here. Are you able to listen for leaks while you're doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing you always want to be listening for, right? Which, I've seen drivers, tell me, well, yeah, I check this thing for a leak every day. I never hear anything leaking. Well, do you have the brakes released when you're checking for a leak, Which, you got to watch that, right? Because, if you're hooked to a trailer, sure, you can keep the tractor brakes set, release the trailer brakes, listen for them, and then you can go back, set the trailer brakes, release the tractor brakes, and listen for a leak. Because you got to remember, on our big trucks, on the parking systems, your red knob, yellow knob there, when you push those in, you're actually applying air pressure to release the parking side of those brakes. That's what that's about, right? And I know if you have a CDL and everything, that's part of understanding how that stuff works. So everyone should know that, but I don't know. It's just kind of hard for me to start talking about that without really, explaining why I say the things I do. But that's where you want to listen for a leak is once they're released.
Well,
because
you said
there's no air pressure there.
Yeah, Kevin, you said that everybody should know this, but if everybody knew this, we wouldn't have Maintenance Matters. And I'm not being a jerk about that.
True.
It's the number of people who actually don't understand the very equipment they're driving. I wanted to ask you about a brake drum really quickly. It's okay to have cracks. I've been told that it's okay to see. I mean, you got to see. I mean, look, stuff wears down. The worst thing you can do to a truck is actually turn it over, because it all just begins to fall apart the moment you start to drive it. That's just the law of entropy.
They just don't like going that. They don't. Yeah, the laws of physics just don't like things working upside down.
But I've had people who first started who have panic attacks. They see a little tiny crack on their brake drum, and they're like, "Oh, here's the crack of doom." No, dude, that.
No.
What is it though? It's about a half an inch. Is that about right? After that, it becomes problematic.
Well, actually, it could be less than that. The thing you want to look for on brake drums is now you want to look when the brakes are actually set or applied, because that way you've got pressure on those drums. Because for DOT standards, for an annual inspection standard, you can have cracks in the drum as long as when the brakes are applied, it does not separate. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense.
That crack don't move.
It makes perfect sense.
Because if the crack moves, that means it's actually cracked through the entirety of that drum.
It's beginning to split.
Now you've got a problem. Yeah.
I mean, okay, that is that
But
big.
yeah, you'll see lots of cracks on drums and stuff that don't fail inspections. That are still usable. Still have good life on them. But those are just heat checks. It's what is the term I've always used for them, because they're brakes. They generate a lot of heat. You got 80,000 pounds, and you've only got let's just say 80,000 pounds. You've got, well, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 wheel ends trying to stop this 80,000 pounds. There's a lot of energy that's got to be dissipated through the form of heat to slow that down. So,
which is why, by the way, it's called a brake check and not a brake look, because what you're talking about here is what
right.
and like I said, once again, it seems like we're just talking 101 here, but the number of people who don't know the difference between even a close look and actually checking, as we talked about with the slack adjusters, actually taking the time to check, to really check. It doesn't mean you got to beat the things up, but you do have to kind of get a sense of where pressure is being applied, what happens when that pressure is applied, what happens when you pull, all of that kind of stuff. We got a little bit of time left here. If you would, Mike, we got to talk about linings and hoses, what you're looking for. Like I said, because a quick glance might get you out of the. Here's the thing. Sometimes you might take such good, what I call cosmetic care of stuff that maybe the inspector doesn't notice, but it doesn't mean you're not setting yourself up for disaster. So talk about linings and hoses.
Well, you want to make, like I said before, you want to make sure that they're, especially with airlines, that they're not. They can be next to other components, but what you got to remember is you got to think about when this thing's going down the road. If you take a tie strap, put it around an airline, and pull it up next to the frame rail, but that airline, after it leaves that tie strap, goes to a brake chamber that's on the axle. Well, there's a shock and suspension there, so that axle's moving up and down, which means the airline's going to move up and down. But that frame rail shouldn't be. So now you've got something moving against something that's steady. That's going to create your issues. If that makes, I know that sounds simplified, but that's where we see a lot of issues. It's just where airlines are connecting one, and that's why we use, rubber airlines, nylon airlines, different things like that, because they have to be flexible because things are constantly moving on a truck, with the bumps and the roads and, things are always moving. Nobody can see me moving my hands, but I'm talking with my hands right now, so I got to watch that.
That's okay. Well, the thing is, the kind of overall rule here for this entire thing when it comes to brake inspecting your own brakes, and you should be inspecting them and not just looking at them, the really kind of golden rule is things should move, but not too much.
Exactly.
That's everything should have a bit of give, even things that seem like they're incredibly firm. Everything should have a little bit of slack, right?
Well, and I know everyone's seen this, but it kind of rings true for this, and I know this is kind of a Kevin Lindsey funny moment, senior moment, whatever you want to call it. But there's an old thing out there that if it moves and it's not supposed to, you duct tape it. But if it don't move and it's supposed to, you use WD-40, right? Those two things fix anything.
So duct tape to reduce movement and WD-40 to increase movement, basically.
Increase movement. There you go.
That's it.
But
Maintenance
no.
Matters. Every episode of Maintenance Matters has been boiled down to two simple sentences. There it is.
Simple things, right?
Get that duct tape and get WD-40. Kevin, we got about a minute left here. I can't believe how fast this went, to be honest with you. Really, really quickly, with the air hoses, how do you kind of, like I said, there's some obvious ways, but how do you kind of get an ahead sense of, I'm not quite at the place where this is worn all the way down, but maybe it's time to change them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And a lot of the rubber airlines, because typically we have, there's nylon, the harder plastic airlines, but then the rubber airlines, can be black, red, there's different colors, but, most of them are black. But there's layers to those. And the outer layer a lot of times can rub through, and you'll see a little bit of cord, but if it's just the outer layer, the hose itself is still intact. It's good. The problem with that is the way different laws and inspection processes are written within, the inspection criteria. It can be interpreted differently by different people. So my take on that has always been that anytime if I see chafing on an airline to a point that I see any kind of cord showing from underneath, even if it's the outer layer of cords, it should be replaced. Because you really need to put a new one on it, because it has affected the strength of that hose to an extent. So,
by the way, chafing on it.
One good thing to look for.
This is the difference between you and me, Kevin. Chafing on an airline for you, of course, means a brake inspection. Chafing on an airline for me means sitting too long on an international flight. Kevin Lindsey has joined us this morning. Sorry, I had to slip that. I've been sitting on that for a while, pun intended. The manager of technical service over at TravelCenters of America joins us, as he always does, for Maintenance Matters. Every Tuesday. Glad to have you, my friend, and we'll keep talking about this and many more things when we come back next week. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.